Last time I shared the story of the Egyptian clown mummy. That may have been the first story I shared, but it's not the oldest I found in my research. The story of Homer's Odyssey has been retold since the dawn of Western civilization, but recent examination of a cache of documents reveals there's more to the story than we'd realize. A crate of ancient Greek texts, including versions of Homer's Odyssey, thousands of years old, were stored for nearly a century in the Hamburger Ancient Manuscript Museum. Just as British forces were moving in at the end of the Second World War, an intrepid Soviet NKVD officer named Ivan Klounikov was able to whisk a trove of these transcripts behind Soviet lines, using the only transport available, a German ice cream truck. This story was later made into a very popular Soviet-era action thriller movie called The Klounikov in the Ice Cream Truck. After the Berlin Wall fell, these documents ended up in the Montauk Antiquities Museum in charming Montauk, New York. Recently, historians at the museum have discovered a whole section of the Odyssey, previously unread, that frames Odysseus' decision to risk passage by the sirens that had previously lured ships to their doom. Apparently, the Sirens Strait was not the most direct route home to Ithaca. That was, instead, the very placid Strait of Clowns. And here we read the newly discovered passage from Homer. And brave Odysseus, who neither shirked nor shrank from the rattle of fierce Hector's spear, nor the bronze bows of Priam's brawny archers, quailed inside at the smell of cotton candy and the rattle of the calliope. As we all now know, Odysseus chose to skip the placidly calm waters of the Strait of Clowns and sail through the raging currents surrounded by fierce rocks and certain death promised by the literal siren call. The next incident of clowns in history doesn't come from the Bible, but the Bible is where you've heard of Jonah and the whale. The prophet Jonah ended up in the whale because he didn't want to deliver a message of judgment to the people of Nineveh, since his suspicion that they would repent and be saved turned out to be true. The book of Jonah records that his hatred toward the Assyrians was so fierce that he chose a certain death of being tossed overboard into a raging tempest instead of volunteering to follow God's command. Jonah's wishes for a Ninevite genocide would have surprised no one at that time. The Assyrians had a particularly cruel reputation, but just how cruel has only recently been discovered in the records of their neighbors, the Hittites. According to Hittite texts, the worst offenders in Syria were sentenced to the much dreaded trial by 100 clowns, in which the victim was forced to encounter 100 clowns, each with 2 cones of cotton candy. Were the victim to survive the encounter and eat all 200 cones of cotton candy, they would be free to go. The Hittite ambassador revealed in his report that no one had ever survived the ordeal, either opting for a torturous execution descending into madness, or succumbing to a fatal diabetic coma. The next story I am allowed to share comes from the book by 1963, in which Professor Darnold Barnum defends his view that Nero did not burn Rome. In his best-selling work with the gripping title, Why I Believe Nero Did Not Burn Rome, Donald Barnum cites a manuscript from the ruins of Pompeii, revealing that the night that Rome burned, Nero held a wild party in his villa, culminating in a lantern juggling act by Butterfingers the Clown. Dr. McBarnum argues that while this anecdote may not exonerate Nero directly, it should be, at the least, considered exculpatory. The last story we have time to cover also comes from Rome, and it satisfies a centuries-old controversy among historians that led some to allege that the Constantinople Chamber of Commerce paid Alaric and his Goths to sack Rome, along with hiring someone inside the walls to open the gates. This alludes to the question of how the Romans, even in their declining years, would allow the Goths into the city of Seven Hills. But there may be another explanation. A cache of recently released documents from the Vatican archives revealed that Alaric and his Goths weren't the only people groups pushed out of Eastern Europe by advancing Huns. In August of 409, 1 year before Alaric's sack of Rome, the inhabitants of a village of Transylvanian clowns, fleeing the Huns, had passed within a mile of the city of Rome, sparking such horror that when Alaric and the Goths approached, brandishing swords and spears and torches, the Romans did not take them seriously, because they were not clowns. This is clearly reflected in an old Italian peasant saying in common usage up through the early 19th century. At least they weren't clowns. We believe this statement was replaced after Napoleon broke up the Papal States and installed his relatives as kings on the subcontinent, where the new statement cited by peasants was, at least it wasn't a short Corsican in a big sideways hat. Next time, our study of clowns in history will move to the modern era. As the Middle Ages descended on Europe, we slowly began to see the appearance of maps, where along the edges and unknown, unexplored corners, there would be the portentous warning written, "Here be clowns."